Hey, biology class, it's Miss Butler. Last week you started studying kingdoms of life with archaea bacteria and eubacteria. This week you're going to study protists and fungus. Let's start with the protist kingdom. All protists are eukaryotes that have to live near water. They can be one or many-celled, make their own food, have to search for food, or even both. Some can move, but others can't. There's three categories: animal-like protists, fungus-like, and plant-like. Let's start with animal-like. Animal-like protists act like animals, and their name is protozoans. Protozoans are one-celled heterotrophs, and they're grouped based on how they move. Some move with flagella, which is that whip-like tail. Some move with cilia, which look like little eyelashes around the cell. And some move with pseudopods. Pseudopods are also called false feet, and an amoeba has a pseudopod. Protozoans with pseudopods basically push their membrane in one direction. You see the arrows in the diagram, and the cytoplasm flows into the pushed out bulge. That allows the protozoan to move, and it drags the rest of the cell behind it. Watch this. Pseudopods in action. So this is an amoeba, and it's eating a smaller protist. And this one cell pushes out its false feet to kind of encapsulate its food. Some protozoans have cilia, and those are the hair-like structures that help them move and also help them get food and sense their environment. Ciliates are multicellular sometimes, and they can have two different nuclei. One controls everyday functions, and the other nucleus is used for reproduction. And again, this is a paramecium. That's an example of a protozoan with cilia. These are paramecium. If you look around their edge, you see the cilia. They look like little eyelashes. Some protozoans move with a flagellum, or more than one would be flagella, and they're called zooflagellates. The flagellum is like a whip, and it helps it move. These usually live inside other organisms. Fungus-like protists act like a fungus. They're like animals, they're heterotrophs, but they're like plants because they have cell walls. Fungus-like protists reproduce with spores, but they're not in the fungi kingdom because these organisms can actually move at some point in their lives. An example of a fungus-like protist is slime mold. Plant-like protists are protists you're familiar with. They're better known as algae. All plant-like protists are autotrophs. They can be one-celled or very large, like giant kelp forests. Kelp is a type of algae. They contain different pigments, so they can be green, but they can also be brown or red. So any plant-like protist is called algae. So after the protist kingdom, you're also going to study the fungus kingdom or the fungi kingdom. These are also eukaryotes, and they use spores for reproduction. A common fungus that you have heard of is yeast. They're heterotrophs that all feed in a similar way. They need a warm and slightly damp environment to grow. An example other than yeast would be bread molds and mushrooms. So fungi use a structure called hyphae to get their food, except for yeast. Yeast only have one cell, and so they kind of feed through their cell membrane. The multicellular fungi use hyphae to get their food, and it's like little thread-like tube structures. The shape of the fungus depends on how the hyphae are used. For example, this is a type of fungus, bread mold, and its hyphae grows into the food, and it secretes digestive chemicals. After the food is broken down, the hyphae absorb it like straws in a drink. You don't ever want to eat moldy bread because even if you pick off the mold on the top, if you notice the hyphae network at the bottom is deep inside of the piece of bread. How fungi reproduce is by using spores. Spores have a protective covering, and so when water or air blows them around, they can use that protection to land into a warm, moist place so that they can grow. When there's plenty of moisture, fungi reproduce asexually, that means one parent, by releasing the spores. So when the conditions are not good, they can actually reproduce with two parents sexually, making new spores that are different from both parents. Yeast is an unusual fungus because it's only made of one cell, and so it doesn't have spores. It reproduces by budding. Budding is when a smaller version of the yeast will grow off of the body of the mother cell, and then it will break off. Fungi have 4 classifications. Thread-like fungi is like your bread mold, and we talked about that earlier. Sac fungus has spores and structures that look like sacs. An example of sac fungus is yeast. Club fungus is the fungus that you're familiar with. Mushrooms are club fungi. They produce spores and structures that look like an upside-down golf club. The 4th type of fungus is called imperfect. These fungi are kind of unusual because scientists are still studying how they reproduce. They can't reproduce sexually. An example of an imperfect fungi is penicillin and also athlete's foot. Athlete's foot is a fungus that grows on or feeds on, you guessed it, your skin cells. Athlete's foot requires some treatment of some antifungal medication. This is why you always want to wear your shoes and socks when you're in the gym locker room.